very much for that kind introduction. It's wonderful to be here. What a great organization you all are. I'm so grateful for you. It's great to hear the earlier presentations. We're going to take a little time jump here. We've been talking about the womb, and we're going to jump ahead to talk about the tomb. We're going to go from embryos at birth, and we're going to jump ahead 60, 70, 80, 90 years to the end of life. And I want to talk about a subject called MOLST. How many here have heard that term and are familiar with what that is? So a few of you. Okay. How many here have a healthcare proxy? Good number. Okay. As some of you may know, Massachusetts has begun a program to encourage all of us at the end of life to prepare a document called a MOLST form. This is what it looks like. There are copies in your packet which look like this. The version that the state encourages people to use is on hot pink paper. You don't have the hot pink version in your packet. You have the cool version. It's hot pink so that when emergency responders arrive at your apartment or home, they'll see this on the refrigerator. Around the country, this form is called different things. In Massachusetts, we refer to it as MOLST, or Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. Nationally, the most common term is POLST, or Physician Orders. Some states use POST or MOST, Medical Orders for Scope of Treatment. And here is the form. Let's take a minute and we're going to go through the form briefly. If you look at the top, there's some instructions, a place to record the patient's name. And then under A, you have an option of whether you want to have cardiopulmonary resuscitation or CPR performed if you are to stop breathing or your heart is to stop. And then going down to items B and C, additional issues regarding health treatment. Then there's a place for you to sign under D, and then the clinician, the physician, or a nurse practitioner signs under E. On the second page, under F, there's some additional issues, whether if you wanted to be intubated or ventilated, whether that would be short-term or not, a question regarding dialysis, and what for me is a very disturbing question about nutrition and hydration. Do you, at the end of life, want someone to give you something to eat or drink? Also on this page, the patient and the doctor would sign. So that's just a brief introduction to the form itself. There are a variety of documents which are used at the end of life to help with a patient's care. And this is what's called a DNR form. Anyone familiar with the DNR form? This is a very common form. It's filled out by the physician and signed if the patient does not wish to have resuscitation, does not wish to have CPR performed. This is a healthcare proxy form. There are a couple of different versions. This is the common one in Massachusetts. And by the way, I'm going to make available some copies of the healthcare proxy form. For those of you who don't have one, I encourage filling out healthcare proxy. For those of you who are Roman Catholic, there's a Catholic version which is fantastic. I have some copies of that, and I'll make those available. Where would be the best place to put that? On the table out in the hall?
I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay, I'll put them out there. Thank you, Anne. So we have a variety of end-of-life documents, the healthcare proxy, the DNR order, and now this new one, the MOLST. The original one, though, was the so-called living will. In a living will, you write down what you want done and what you don't want done. In Massachusetts, living wills are not legal, and there are good reasons for that. There are real problems with living wills. In Massachusetts, healthcare proxies are the standard end-of-life document, but the MOLST form is now the hot topic. And there's a number of ways of thinking about MOLST. I think the easiest way to think about it is it's a living will with teeth, or a living will on steroids. A living will is something that you would write and say, I don't want this done, I'd like this done, I don't want this done. A MOLST form is the living will with the doctor's orders behind that. So when an emergency technician or hospital sees that MOLST form, that's an order that they are obligated to follow. Another way to look at it is to say a MOLST form is a medical document, whereas a healthcare proxy is a legal document. One question that comes up in regards to MOLST forms is, what's the relationship between the healthcare proxy and the MOLST form? If you have a healthcare proxy, and in my case, my wife is my proxy, let's say I were to fill out a MOLST form and say on there that I don't want to have dialysis. And I become ill, I lose consciousness, and the doctors say, your husband needs dialysis, but just for a short time. But he's got this MOLST form which says we can't do dialysis. Well, fortunately in Massachusetts, the healthcare proxy trumps the MOLST. So as my healthcare proxy, my wife could say to the doctors, forget the MOLST form, go ahead. This is backed up by the legal consultant for the MOLST program in an opinion from Margaret Metzger. In a diagrammatic way to get a sense as to what these different forms are all about, the top circle is the healthcare proxy form. It's different from the other forms. On the bottom, on the left-hand side here, the green, doctor's orders. So when I as a physician write a prescription for a medication, that's a doctor's order. When I'm at the hospital and I go on the computer and I type in an order, that's in that green circle. A DNR order, that page that I showed earlier, is an example of a doctor's order. So is a MOLST form, to some extent. But a MOLST form is also, to some extent, a living will. So there's an overlap between a MOLST form, between living wills and doctor's orders. If you look at the whole history of this process, it's relatively recent. The whole concept of living wills originated within our lifetimes, most of us here. In 1967, an attorney, a man named Louis Kuttner, published an article in a law journal suggesting the concept of a living will. And interestingly, he was a member of the Euthanasia Society. In 1991, in Oregon, this whole idea of MOLST or POLST originated. And there was a task force that was created out there to encourage this idea. The forms started to be used in Oregon in 1995, and the whole program went national about 10 years ago. It's gradually spread across the country. Early adopters were West Virginia and Wisconsin. Currently, there's about 43 states in the country that are using some version of the POLST-MOLST form. In Massachusetts, we started down this road in 2008. The legislature passed a bill which established the MOLST demonstration program. It's a collaboration between the Department of Public Health and a program at UMass Medical School here in Worcester called Commonwealth Medicine. So Worcester's really the center of this effort in Massachusetts. In 2010, MOLST began to try to implement the use of these forms within the Worcester area as an initial demonstration project, and the statewide use of the forms started to be promoted 2 years ago. Their target date is that this year, MOLST will start to be used throughout the state. Those of you who haven't seen this form will start to be seeing it. And you'll see it when you go to the hospital, in the emergency rooms, you have a patient in the hospital, particularly someone who's very ill, you'll start to see this being recommended. If you have a relative who is admitted to a hospice program, MOLST is being encouraged for hospice patients. If you are someone receiving home care services and you're significantly ill, MOLST is starting to be used in those settings. In nursing homes, that's a special place where MOLST is being pushed. Assisted living programs, all of these places are places where MOLST is being encouraged. So who's behind this whole idea? Of course, state and federal governments are pushing the idea. Interestingly, the first state to get in on this was Oregon. What do you all know about Oregon? Okay. If you want to get a sense as to what MOLST is all about, just look at where it started. And who is supporting MOLST? Well, how many here know of the group Compassion and Choices? Yeah, they're the ones that are pushing assisted suicide, euthanasia, and on their website, this is what they have to say about POLST or MOLST. POLST programs represent an important step forward in advanced planning for end-of-life care. The whole POLST effort has received a lot of foundation money support. Four foundations in particular have been heavy supporters of the POLST program nationally. All of these organizations also are heavy supporters of Right to Die organizations. Two individuals in particular thought was interesting or involved with this effort. The chairperson of the POLST task force is also a member of the Coalition for Compassionate Care in California, which sponsored the assisted suicide legislation in that state. Anybody know Representative Blumenauer from Oregon, by reputation? He was the one who put together the proposal in Obamacare that came to be known as the death panel. And he recently filed another piece of legislation, HR 1173, which has this interesting name, Personalize Your Care Act. And the idea of it is to promote the POLST program. Who is concerned about POLST or MOLST? A couple of years ago, the National Right to Life organization at their convention raised concerns about POLST. There was a presentation on this subject. Bishops in the state of Wisconsin, which was one of the early adopters of POLST, issued a joint statement cautioning people in that state about potential problems with POLST. In 2013, last year, the Catholic Medical Association, which Dr. Carpentier and Dr. Roloff and I are involved with, issued a wonderful white paper on this whole subject. It's available online for anyone who's interested. It's got all the details. I'm just touching the highlights here. If you really want to get the details on this, check out the white paper from CMA. A national organization called the Pro-Life Healthcare Alliance also last year came out opposed to POLST. One of my particular concerns about MOLST or POLST is this issue of nutrition and hydration, which, as I showed, is on the second page of the form. And it gives you the option of no artificial nutrition or hydration, or using artificial nutrition or hydration, or whether you're undecided or did not discuss the subject. It presents this in a sort of morally neutral way, as if it's sort of okay to choose whichever box you want to choose. But anybody who kind of thinks about this subject at all, hope will realize that to not feed or give water to someone, there's something wrong with that. And I could talk a lot about this issue, but I'm just going to touch on that as a highlight as one of my concerns. As you may know, there is a significant development in the last couple of years using the process of dehydration as a means of slow euthanasia. Anybody run into this? Yeah. And what's done is the patient is, the family is told the patient is dying, we should keep them comfortable, they're given large doses of morphine, they lapse into a coma because they're so drugged up. In coma, they can't eat or drink. What happens? A few days later, maybe a week later, they die. What's on the death certificate? On the death certificate is cancer or heart attack or whatever. But what was the real cause of death? It was dehydration. Let me tell you a couple of stories. The first one is a patient of mine, a fellow I'll call Harry, not his real name. He was a delightful but very unfortunate gentleman who had multiple medical problems. He had terrible heart, diabetes, was very overweight, couldn't get around, could barely get out of bed, lived alone. He'd been in and out of hospital. He had a pacemaker and defibrillator put in, and during one of his hospital stays, he said, look, I don't want to be resuscitated. If I die, let me die. I want this defibrillator turned off. Don't do CPR. And we did that. We turned off his defibrillator, and unfortunately, he had no healthcare proxy, no family, no close friends. He was a loner. He suffered a heart attack. EMS was called, and they brought him to UMass as opposed to our facility in Southbridge. The doctors at UMass didn't know his medical situation, did not know that he did not wish to have CPR performed. They went through the whole medical full court press. He was in the ICU for a couple of weeks, went to rehab, back to the hospital, and eventually died after about 2 months. A MOLST form in his case might have been helpful. If he had had a MOLST form on his refrigerator saying, these are things I've decided I don't want. I don't want to be resuscitated. And if that had been signed by myself or another physician, it might have been very helpful. So this is one situation where a MOLST form could be helpful. This is a more common situation. I'll call this patient Betty. Betty's a very spry 82-year-old who lives in an assisted living. And she came in to see me carrying this MOLST form. And I said, what you got there, Betty? And she said, I got this form for you to sign. Well, as a doctor, that's the last thing we want to hear. I got a form for you to sign. Even in the age of computers, we get lots of forms we get asked to sign. So she says, I want you to sign this form. I said, well, okay, I'll look at the form for you. And I knew about MOLST. And I looked at the form, and she had checked off that she didn't want this, and she didn't want that, and she didn't want this. And I said, Betty, did you fill this out? And she said, yeah, the nurses helped me. And I said, well, do you know what all this means? And she said, well, I think so. And I said, well, let's say you're in the dining room and you choke on a piece of meat. Would you want the nurses to come help you? And she said, of course. Well, if you have a DNR order, if you check off on your MOLST form, no resuscitation, you can't perform CPR if you choke on a piece of meat. She said, oh. She didn't understand the implications of checking those little boxes. And those little boxes can have life or death consequences. So in Betty's case, a MOLST form could have been life-threatening. Talk about another situation, another patient, a woman who has terrible lung disease. She can could barely walk across the room because of her shortness of breath. She'd been in and out of the hospital. She was very worn down by her disease, in constant suffering, and she had had enough. She felt it was her time. She did not want to be resuscitated, did not want a respirator, and she got admitted to the hospital again. And we did not put her on a respirator. We put her on temporary breathing assistance with CPAP. Her family came in. Her family said, "You got to help her. She's going to die. What are you going to do?" And we said, "Well, Helen, as you know, didn't want to be put on the breathing machine again." And her family said, "Well, you've got to help her." So what do? If we had filled out a MOLST form and signed it, we wouldn't have been able to do anything. She didn't have a healthcare proxy. What we decided to do was we transferred her to UMass. She was intubated. She was helped with treatment and survived. She got home, and I talked to her in the office when she came in about 10 days later, and I said, "Helen, how do you feel about what happened?" And she said, "You know, I'm glad, because my family wasn't ready." That's one of the huge problems with all of this living will, MOLST problem, is we think we know what we would want, but we really don't know till we get there. It's kind of like marriage, you know. We think we know what our fiance is like, but boy, until you sign on the dotted line and the ring is going on the finger, you really don't know. Even if you've lived with the person for years, you still don't know. So this is an example of a situation where MOLST would have been very unfortunate. There is one other scenario where MOLST could potentially be helpful, actually. This is not an anti-MOLST talk. I just want to raise some pros and cons and thoughts about it. Roger, a 78-year-old fellow with a bad heart, had some strokes, and he lived with family members, and he was not in good shape, but enjoyed spending time with his grandchildren, had a strong faith, wasn't afraid of death, prayed the rosary, and the last time he went in the hospital, his family and the staff were encouraging him to consider being DNR, consider not being resuscitated. And he was told, you know, as you get sicker, your quality of life declines, and you might not want us to do certain things. Roger sort of had the feeling that everybody wanted him to give up. And he even sort of had that feeling about his family. And unfortunately, this sometimes happens. Roger, on the other hand, wasn't ready to give up. He was still interested in doing what he could with his grandchildren. This is someone for whom a MOLST form could potentially be helpful. To say, yes, I do want this, and I do want to live, and I do want nutrition and hydration if I'm at the end of life and I can't make my own decisions. So this is one other situation where a MOLST could be helpful. So in summary, at least in my opinion, I do not recommend MOLST for most patients. And if it is used, you really need to take care in how you fill it out. And Part F, the issue of artificial nutrition and hydration, I would never recommend that be checked off. On the contrary, healthcare proxies, I think, are very helpful. And I would encourage everyone, certainly everyone over 50, in my practice, anybody over 50, they get healthcare proxies every time I see them for a physical. If you haven't done it, I'll get another one. And some of my patients say, I've got 5 copies of this at home. And I say, well, all I need is one with your signature. And the healthcare proxy is very helpful. And for Catholics, there is a Catholic version which has some additional wrinkles, which I think are wonderful. And as I said, I'll put some copies out on the table. Yes, spring is coming. I want to sort of step back for a couple of minutes from the details of MOLST to what might be a somewhat philosophical digression about this whole issue of end of life in our society. And at times it's hard to see this because it's sort of like the air we breathe. You don't see it, it's everywhere. I've been a physician for 30 years now, and I've seen a progression during that time. There's been a real sea change. There's what I call the quality of life threshold now, which is this sense that once your quality of life has deteriorated to a certain point, your life is no longer worth living. And that if you're active and smart and healthy and useful and attractive and have not too many wrinkles, yes, let's embrace life and go for the gusto. But if we are not productive, if our life is somewhat embarrassing to others, if we are weak, if we are handicapped, if we are perhaps inconvenient to others, if we're a burden to others, if our life is expensive to others or society, then we drop below that quality of life threshold, and death is the way to go. There's, if you will, two ways of looking at death. There is this quality of life concept which views death as something which is to be feared, as something which is an end to all things. Death is decay, corruption. Death is something we are anxious about, something that causes a sense of despair. And out of that fear and that anxiety, we seek to control it. We seek to stave it off. We seek to run from it. We seek to control and have death in our own terms. We die when we want to die in our own terms. We seek control. But there's another way of looking at this subject of death and life, if you will, and that's what I would call the kingdom way. As a Christian, I see death through the eyes of faith. Death, I'm not afraid to die. Death for me is the beginning of the second chapter. Death is an opportunity for resurrection. The cross was a horrendous thing, but what did it lead to? It led to the resurrection. In the kingdom way of seeing death, it's about trust. Yes, as I get older, I will suffer problems. I will have health issues. I will become a burden to someone, my wife, my children. But I trust that God will use that for good. And I have hope. I'm not despairing. I have hope that my life and my death can have meaning and purpose. And as opposed to feeling that I need to control my death, the extreme of controlling death, of course, is the whole concept of assisted suicide. You know, you go to the doctor and you get the bottle of pills and you decide, well, on Tuesday, I'm going to call it a day. But in the kingdom way of seeing things, I let God make that decision. God's in charge. He knows when it's time for me to come home. And he may wish me to die suddenly. He may wish me to have a lingering phase during the end of my life for his purposes. But his will be done. St. Paul wrote in his letter to the Philippians this most wonderful passage. For to me life is Christ, and death is gain. If I go on living in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me and for God. And I do not know which I shall choose. I'm caught between the two. I long to depart this life and be with Christ, for that is far better. So in Christ we have the best of both worlds. If I'm here, I get to do God's work. What an opportunity. If I die, I get to be with Christ. Thanks be to God, what a joy. What's to worry about? There's a marvelous book that was written. I like old books. Most of the books I like to read, they're 200 years old, 300 years old. In the case of the Bible, 2,000 years old. There's a great book called The Art of Dying Well. Anybody run across that? Okay, you got some homework to do. All right. This is a marvelous book. It was written by Robert Bellarmine, who the Catholic Church considers a saint, in 1619. And it's a marvelous little book. And he says this. He says, "He who desires to die well must live well. Now, that he may live well, it is necessary in the first place that we die to the world before we die in the body." In the world's view, there's a lot of talk about a good death. You all heard that term. It's bandied about a lot these days. The assisted suicide movement talked about that as a good death, on your own terms, in your own time. A painless death, no suffering, quick, no burden, easy on the family. But I have another way of looking at a good death. For me, a good death is in Christ. A good death is a death that leads to heaven. In a good death, I'm at peace. In a good death, I face death redeemed by Christ. By the blood of Christ, when I die, I will be without sin. Right now, not so good. I'm working on it. In death, perhaps in some way, I pray my life and my death might lead someone else in some way closer to Christ. That's my view of a good death. These are the apple blossoms I'm hoping for in about another, 8 weeks, something like that. Thank you all very much.